Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Baker. I'm with Firestorm in Roswell, Georgia, and we're delighted to have you joining us today for this Georgia Independent School Association webinar. This is part of the Crisis Coach webinar series. Today is the 12th in the series, of the 2015 series, and we're talking about the year in review. We also would like you to have you become our friend. On Facebook, we're Firestorm Solutions. On Twitter, we're Firestorm Soul. And there is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value, empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communication, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We'd like to remind you, though, that this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and the work product presented today must be read and considered with guidance from your organization's personal counsel. And this information should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. Firestorm is delighted to have an ongoing relationship with the Georgia Independent School Association. They're our good friends, and this is the third year that they've been providing these webinars to their members and friends. Jeff Jackson is out assisting schools today, so he is not able to join us, but he would wish you a happy holidays and to keep up the good work that you are doing. Our presenter today is Harry Rulin. Harry is the Chief Executive Officer and the Chairman of Firestorm. He's also one of the co-founders, and we're delighted to have Harry with us to discuss this timely subject. Harry, over to you, please.
Bill, thanks so much. And I am really happy to be talking to the independent schools today. As you guys can imagine, at this time of the year, we do a lot of year-end wrap-up, both in terms of webinars and seminars, but also just in meeting with our clients and talking to them about the things they saw this year, how it affected their plans. And that is really some of the stuff I'd like to talk to you about today, because it's a great time of the year for some reflection. And from a school perspective, this year really does require quite a bit of reflection. The world around us is changing. The world around your schools is changing. You know, one of the things you're going to hear me talk about consistently in this presentation, and I know all of you have heard me talk about it before, as my biggest issue for businesses, for schools, for everyone, for individuals, is exactly that issue, the rate of change. Because of technology, we're seeing this exponential rate of change in terms of the way people communicate, in terms of the opportunities for things to go wrong, also for things to go right. I mean, a lot of these technological changes are making our lives easier, but I want to talk to you about the effects that that might be having on some of your schools, your organizations, on the students, on the teachers, on the, all of the different members of your community, how things are changing, and therefore how you have to factor that into your process. So let me back up for just a second in terms of process. You've all heard Firestorm talk in the past about our methodology, which is predict, plan, perform. I can't stress enough to you how important it is at the beginning of this year to go back to your predictive work. So much has changed during the year, and the only way you're going to see it, the only way you're going to realize it, is to sit down in a room with your people and say, hey, what have you seen? What's keeping you up at night? What kind of concerns do you have? What have your students done? What have you seen faculty, staff? What's going on that we need to be aware of? And I can guarantee you some of the things you're going to hear are going to surprise you. So again, that's the biggest emphasis I can say on where do you start. When we ask the question, can you identify your organization's next crisis? I can tell you for sure you can. Your people know almost everything that can go wrong at your organization. And if you can document what the vulnerabilities and exposures are, you can develop appropriate plans, processes, and procedures to mitigate or eliminate those. And that is what is expected of you. For sure, when I send my child to your school, my expectation is that you have done that. And the brand and reputation of your organization is riding on that. So we'll talk a little bit more about how that works, going forward in this presentation. But if you, want help or assistance in coordinating that process, in understanding what the process should be for doing a vulnerability and threat analysis, for sitting down with your people, don't hesitate to give us a buzz. We'd be happy to talk that through with you. But one of the things we find with schools, almost invariably, when we respond to a school crisis, the people say to us, gosh, we never thought it would happen to us. Crises are just not that common. They just don't happen. We just didn't think it was going to happen to us. And I can tell you definitively, crises happen every day. They don't necessarily happen to you, but they happen to someone. Thousands and thousands of them on a weekly basis. And it's the kind of thing where, if there was a fire at a plant across town, that wasn't a crisis for you. I can guarantee you it was a crisis for them. So it's an interesting statistic that, that this study, this Dawson Association did, that 64% of businesses call 911 during the year. You think about that. If you had to call 911, something was going particularly wrong. So when you look at the breakdown of what occurred there, 52% of the calls to 911 were medically related. Now, that we're all familiar with. We have emergency response plans. All of you know from previous Firestorm webinars, we break down the response process in various steps. The first one being emergency response. Emergency response is life safety. Life safety is where you're probably going to wind up calling 911, whether it's medically related, whether it's criminally related. So crimes and violence. When we responded to the last school shooting that we were involved in a couple of months ago, there had already been 47 school shootings in 2015. So that issue is alive, well, front and center in the United States today. Because of what just happened in San Bernardino, there's been a lot of talk on the news, and you hear about it all the time, talking about gun control. Completely unrealistic and not something that any of us should rely on as a way that we're going to keep our people safe. Every single school on this call must have in place, and I know most of you do, a behavioral risk and threat assessment program where you have trained your people on what behaviors of concern look like and what to do when you see one, and that have a definitive process in place, a behavioral assessment team where a multidisciplinary group of your people are analyzing the behaviors that you see at least on a weekly basis, and that there is a plan in place for those individuals that need help. Because invariably, those students, staff, faculty who are exhibiting those warning signs, they are telegraphing them through their behavior. And the other thing that they're telegraphing them through is their media and social media process. Almost invariably, there are people who know, there are people who are talking about it. When some of the kids are on social media talking about the fact that Johnny got in a fight with his father last night, you want to know that. You absolutely want to know that for a multitude of reasons, because another major source of violence on school campuses are parents and non-custodial parents coming to the campus for bad purposes. So I know we've talked to you during this year on webinars about the process for creating a predictive intelligence network. Absolutely. When you're talking about 2016 and some of your priorities, that should be way up there. If your behavioral risk and threat assessment process, which we refer to as BRTHA, is not right up there, that is the most important thing that a school could be doing. You know, most of the schools that we talk to, most of the companies that we talk to, say that they have plans in place for dealing with various contingencies, and claim that, most of them claim that those plans have been updated at least annually. I think a lot of people say that because they know that that's what's expected of them. What we have found when we go in crisis situations is that rarely have those plans been looked at from an actionability standpoint. Are they really going to work when the time comes? And I think some of you have heard me tell the story before, but one of the things we really focus on is that plans need to tell you not just what to do, but exactly how to do it. And I'll give you this example again. Is we had a school where there was a person outside with a gun, and the kids came running inside. Teacher picked up the phone. At first could not remember, she was an older teacher, could not remember that what she was supposed to do. The kids, of course, remembered, hey, call 911. She dialed 911, and she stood there and waited. And she waited, and she waited for about 30 seconds before she realized the call wasn't going through. She hadn't dialed 9 to get an outside line. Now, that's a situation that you guys need to address. That's a really simple one. If in your school 911 requires a 9, you need to do training with your people, and you need to do what this school did, which is put a sticker on each phone, a bright orange sticker that says, in an emergency, dial 911. You have to tell them how to do it, not just what to do. I will tell you, having been involved in many, many crisis situations, people's brains don't work the way you think they're going to work in a crisis. The simplest things in peacetime become cataclysmic in a crisis. So do not assume that they're going to do it the way you think they're going to do it. The other thing that I'll point out to you, and this is really important, and we absolutely saw this in 2015, and we see this with schools all the time, crises don't happen when you want them to. They happen at all hours of the day and night and weekends, and the people who you think are going to be there to implement that section of the plan aren't there because they're on vacation, or they're at a cheerleading conference with their daughter in California. That was a real situation. And you better make sure that everyone knows what to do and how to do it, that there are people who have been cross-trained. You know, you guys have heard us talk about Firestorm Rule 1, 2, 3, which there's 2 other people trained for each function that is a serious function within your planning process, because be sure that one of the people who you need will not be there. They'll be on vacation, they'll be somewhere else, and of the 2 that are similarly cross-trained, 1 or more may be actually involved in the crisis. So cross-training piece, another thing that you can look at when you sit down and do your 2016 review. Have you adequately cross-trained? You know, one of the things we see with schools is there's a tremendous amount of turnover. You know, if you're a high school, you know, you're 9 through 12, you've got a 25% turnover in your student population annually. You've got we typically see anywhere between 5 and 10% staff turnover in any given year. And if that's the case in your school, and that person was responsible for a particular job in your emergency response, crisis management, or business continuity plans, you've got a hole. So again, identifying those things now, making them part of your planning process, bringing in someone like a Firestorm to do a third-party review once you've done your work. You know, we're going to see things that maybe because you're too close, you don't see. So again, that's all part of that, what we call continuous improvement process. And I know that all of you are walking down that road. You know, it's not, you don't need to be perfect today. There are best practices that you're trying to get your school up to, but the fact that you're working on it, that it's a continuous improvement process, I think that's what's important. So again, if I were focusing on anything, you know, those two things that I talked about earlier, look for, when you're doing your 2016 planning, look at that predictive intelligence network, look at that behavioral risk and threat assessment process. One of the reasons I stress looking at those things is because, as we've seen, it was a particularly difficult year for school shootings. It was a particularly difficult year for racial issues. Violence is ever present. And the fact that you haven't had it on your campus does not mean that you're not going to. It just means that you've been lucky so far. So again, recognizing that it's an issue and that we have to address it. You know, I mentioned non-custodial parents before. You know, some of the schools that are on this call deal with parents that, for one reason or another, are not allowed to make contact with their student. If you find out that a student has such a parent, your people need to be fully aware. They need to know what this person looks like. There needs to be a program in place for what we're going to do if Johnny's father shows up on campus. Because if Johnny's father's willing to break a court order to be on your campus, be sure he's willing to do things that are going to dramatically affect your people from an emergency response standpoint, and God forbid anything goes wrong, it's a brand and reputation problem for your school forever. So again, all that gets incorporated into your predictive process and your planning process, and then again, we have to, the execution of that, the training for your people, I just can't stress enough how important that is. You know, one of the things, it's interesting, we talk about civil unrest and we see it on the news. You know, we see what's going on, and people think somehow that this is a new process. And civil unrest is what the United States was created on. You know, throwing the tea into the harbor was civil unrest. It was rebelling against a government that wasn't providing the services and in the way that we felt we were entitled to. And I think what you're seeing across the country now, I think civil unrest has always been going on. It's just much more visible now. And I think one of the reasons it's more visible, and this is an important thing for everybody to think about when you're doing that analysis, when you sit down with your people and do your predictive work for 2016, is that because every single person, for the most part now, is a publisher, because they carry a cell phone that can record video, audio, those kind of things, and they can publish it, utilizing unrest as a tool for change is only going to increase. And our awareness of it is only going to increase because it's going to be coming to us, as it does now, nonstop via various methods of media. So I think it's important to recognize that. I think we saw, you know, presidents of 2 universities were forced to resign over their responses to racism. You know, it was a civil unrest type of issue. And these kind of things are just as likely in the private school environment as they are in the university environment. So again, factoring that into your process, developing plans for it, understanding what your response, you definitely, you want to look at what is the ethnic and racial makeup of your school. You've got to be monitoring. Your predictive intelligence monitoring system that you have in place has got to be monitoring what's being said on your campus by your students, your staff, your faculty about these kind of issues. People always talk about it. They always text, social media, all these things, and you can know what's being said out there publicly. I'm not in any way advocating that you be hacking into people's accounts or that you be looking at things that are private, but you will be shocked at what people put out there and say out there publicly that you are absolutely entitled to, and I think have an obligation to be looking at. I think that what you're going to see in the coming year or years is that litigation against schools for failure to monitor is going to increase dramatically. I think there is an expectation now that if the information was knowable and that information could have prevented harm or injury, that the school had an obligation to do that. So again, look as part of your 2016 process at how you have integrated your predictive intelligence process with your behavioral risk and threat assessment process, so that when you do see on social media or some other source someone who is ramping up, you have a process in place for dealing with that and for documenting what you've done. I think it's a critical part of your process going forward. I think it's important to remember that the actions of your employees, your teachers, your staff, and actually to some degree your students, can affect your brand forever. So we've seen in some horrific cases, like what we saw with Penn State, where the actions of an individual can have long-term ramifications to the brand of the organization. I think what you'll see with schools as well, you know, one of the things when we responded to some of the major incidents that we have for schools, one of the first things we try to do is explain to the school how not to become defined by the event. And that is, I think, so important to think about as part of your crisis communications planning process. You know, understanding the way that Google works, understanding the way that the crawlers work on the internet, so that when your school is mentioned and it's mentioned in context with something else, that the crawlers will start to make that association automatically. So you never want, if you've had a sexual molestation at your school or you've had some kind of a bad thing occur, you don't ever want people going out there Googling your school name with that other word, because that association you never want to be made. And we can, as part of your crisis communications planning and training, we can help you understand how that works and how to train your people on that very issue. Not just your people internally, but members of your school community, parents of students, students themselves. Important to understand, because again, we don't want the brand and reputation that took some of you years to build, you know, decades, to be destroyed in 140 characters. So I don't know how many of you, I saw that there were numerous schools from the Georgia Independent School Association who joined us for the cyber exercise that we did online 2 days ago. There were 250 organizations on that call that spent a couple of hours with us doing a real cyber risk exercise, testing cyber response plans. I cannot emphasize enough to all of you how important of an issue this is. Cyber risk affects everybody. The FBI says that there are two kinds of organizations in America: those that have been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked. And you think about that, it's really true, because if the White House, the CIA, the FBI, the U.S. Army, if they've all been hacked and they employ the most sophisticated tools possible for preventing it, be sure that your organization is not immune. Now, it's interesting, one of the ways that these hackers are now getting in is through devices that you never would have imagined. So we had a case this year of an organization that was penetrated through a thermostat. They installed a building automation system, and as you guys know, everything these days is being more and more computerized. You know, everything is technologically based. They installed these cool new thermostats that you can control via computer. They're web-enabled, they're Wi-Fi enabled, and I can check the temperature in a room. I can change the temperature in a room from anywhere as long as I have a computer. Well, the problem with that is that the normal type of safety and firewall that would normally be in place for a web-enabled device was not in place for those thermostats, and it enabled a hacker to get into the system. So I think it's important for us to realize there is no way we are ever going to keep up with that rate of change. Recognizing every device and everything that could possibly be affected is just never going to happen. So, interestingly, my wife picked up a new car yesterday, and the salesman told us, I installed your SIM card so your Wi-Fi is ready to go. And I thought, wow, this is the first time I have ever had a web-enabled car. So you can actually sit in that car, and for the first 6 months, they gave us free Wi-Fi. So for the next 6 months, that car is able to sit in there with any type of device that's Wi-Fi enabled and reach the internet. Well, obviously what that means is the internet can reach me too. And it's somewhat scary, because when I lifted the hood of this car, there's nothing under there that isn't computerized. No longer when you push that gas pedal are you actually pushing a cable that pulls open a throttle. It doesn't work that way anymore. You're pushing the pedal, which a sensor understands electronically through a computer, that then opens a little servo motor that tells the gas to flow. All of these things now, and I think you've seen this on the news, where they actually took over control of the acceleration and braking systems in a car remotely. Well, that's a real serious issue to think about with everything in your school that's becoming more and more computerized, and with your kids now having phones and watches and clothing and other things that's web enabled. It creates all kinds of issues that you need to be aware of. From a cyber breach standpoint, even the most simplistic of things to talk about, the cyber exposure for your school, you record social security numbers, in some cases driver's license numbers, if you're allowing parents to pay via credit card, if you're storing bank information for parents that are paying by check. I mean, there's all kinds of data and information that you are responsible for. So we need to think that cyber issue through. By the way, on the 14th, on Monday, we'll be having another one of these cyber webinars. I would very much encourage all of you to join that. If you weren't on the one that we just did, get on the one that's coming up. You can sign up for that on the Firestorm website. And there are various professionals on there from the insurance, accounting, industries that you'll hear some very good information. So I encourage you to do that. As you've heard over the various webinars that we've done, insurance is a big part of the solution to the cyber as well as other issues. What you've heard from us, Suzanne Laughlin, myself, Jim Satterfield, we all come from the insurance world. One of the ways that one of the thoughts, one of the things that when we created Firestorm, we realized that insurance was not a great way of dealing with risk, because insurance is designed to put you back in the same position you were prior to the event, strictly through monetary means. So you've had some type of an occurrence, and here's your money. We're going to compensate you for that. Well, a lot of the things in today's world can't be compensated for. If your brand and reputation's been destroyed, that doesn't help you. If you've had a cyber breach, for example, and you don't know where to go, what to do, what the rules are, what the laws are, money isn't enough. You need all kinds of skills and other things. And realistically, you would have preferred that somebody help you prevent that to start with. Well, that's an interesting thing that's occurred. Insurance is now a different animal than it was. First of all, the insurers are designing very specific coverages to address things that are school specific. So yes, absolutely every school on this call must have a cyber breach policy. No question, it's not even a choice. If it's not in place, talk to your agent, get it. If you don't know, who to go to, we're happy to. We have several partners we work with, and the other thing I can tell you is that those of you who have it in place probably don't have enough, because I was looking just the other day at the loss that Home Depot had. Now, of course, they're gigantic, but the first mailing, just the postage on the first mailing was $22 million. So you need to look at the limits on your cyber policy, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that. We'd be happy to put you in touch with the people that we work with in the insurance world who can just give you an analysis and an opinion of your insurance program. There are other new coverages. There are standalone coverages now for things like sexual molestation. There are standalone coverages for deadly weapons. A new coverage just came out for schools. It's a deadly weapons policy that provides you not only with coverage once you've had a deadly weapons event on your campus, it provides you with analysis and assessment up front and advice on what you could be doing. So again, if those are things you're interested in, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be happy to refer you to the appropriate organizations that are handling those kind of things. But really looking over your insurance program as part of your analysis for 2016, I think that's a really great thing to be doing, again, now during peacetime, before you need it. So look at insurance as part of your overall solution. One of the things you've heard on our webinars, and I know we've talked to a lot of you about one-on-one, is that crises are predictable. One of the things that we see every day is that people are telegraphing their intent to do harm nonstop, literally every single day. Firestorm, as you know, has a predictive intelligence division that's headed up by Karen Masulo, and she and her people monitor for our clients and just generally, actually. One thing we do is we run constant analysis looking for certain keywords, school and gun, and now the tools we use are very sophisticated. They can actually look for emojis as well, as you can see on your screen, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But we pick up weekly some school somewhere monitoring a situation where we wind up either having to call that school or call the police department in that locale to let them know that these things are being said. So I can't emphasize enough to all of you that your predictive intelligence process needs to be robust. You need to be looking at it all the time. You need to be upgrading it to keep up with that rate of change, because things are changing every day. The kids are using different tools. They're using different websites. They're using different, Snapchat used to be the big concern of schools. Snapchat's now old technology. So again, reach out and talk to us if you haven't about your current predictive intelligence process. Because again, there's an expectation that you're doing that, and I think very soon you're going to see that there's going to be liability associated with not doing that. Now, the picture you see on your screen raises a whole new issue for me. 25 years ago, there was no email. People used to communicate via telephone, face-to-face, words. So you knew and understood exactly what somebody was saying. Then when email came around, we started communicating via email, and I hated it because you couldn't understand the inflection. You didn't know exactly what somebody was saying. Then we went to text messages, and we had to shorten it up to the smallest amount of characters possible, even a worse way of communicating. And now we've gone full circle. We've gone right back to the cavemen. We're using pictographs. We're communicating by drawing on cave walls. So emojis are now a method of communication, and the tools that you use need to be sophisticated so that you're monitoring. It used to be, back when people spoke face-to-face, a lot of the people who had problems, who had issues, the people who were going to act out, didn't have a way to telegraph what they were going to do, because they certainly weren't going to walk up to somebody and say, hey, I'm really feeling bad about this, I'm going to shoot somebody. That would have been the rare situation. What I can tell you is, in today's world, the opposite is the case. Almost invariably, there's some catharsis to them in telegraphing what they're going to do. They do put it out there. They put it out there on Facebook, on Twitter, on all kinds of other things, and we have an obligation to know that and to do something about it, so that when you do see that emoji, when you do get that message, okay, what do I now do with it? Our behavioral risk and threat assessment process, which Firestorm refers to as BERTHA, needs to be robust enough that people know, again, not just what to do, but how to do it. What do I do with this information? And not knowing that information is no longer a choice. So again, if we can help you with that, or if you just want us to take a quick look at what you've done, really, please do not hesitate to reach out. Now, my favorite topic, rate of change. I've talked to several of you about this, and I want to talk a little bit more because I think it is the biggest exposure that schools have, that organizations, that our country, our government, everyone has. I get asked all the time, how do we predict this stuff? If stuff's changing so fast, how do we know what to look for? Well, it's really interesting. The people in Hollywood are great at preying on our greatest fears. They are really good at predicting what's coming down the road. So if you go back and look at the movies from the last 10 years, you're going to see movies about communicable illness events with pandemics. You're going to see movies about racial tension and all of these, these things that have, basically all of the things that occur in reality occurred in fiction over the last decade. The Dick Tracy watch that you see on your screen, and then the one, obviously the iWatch that you see also. I've been waiting a long time for the Dick Tracy watch, and now it's here. But I want to remind you of what I was talking about a little while ago, my wife's web-enabled car. Now, if you've got a web-enabled device on your wrist, what does that mean? Because it means a couple of things. It means that you have the ability to do all kinds of things, record things, send things, receive things, but it also means that someone has the ability to get to you. And that's a vulnerability. Is it a vulnerability we need to do anything about? Maybe not. But it's at least something we need to understand and be looking at and continually looking at as time goes on, because I will guarantee you over the course of the coming year or years, you're going to see where web-enabled devices and web-enabled clothing are going to cause certain problems that were never anticipated. And I think you're going to see significant issues that come out of it. So, I know a lot of the schools that we talk to don't allow students to have their smartphones or whatever it might be in the classroom. Well, again, I understand the reason for that, and most of those reasons are fairly innocuous, but some, now you're going to have to be monitoring phones, I mean, literally clothing. I don't know whether you've seen, but there's web-enabled clothing. So again, just being aware of the things, having them on your radar screen, knowing what to do about them and what you're going to do about them, monitoring this rate of change. You know, one of the things you've probably seen on TV is that all of the automakers are working on driverless cars. And in the very near future, you will see them on the road, and in the fairly, not distant future, you will see them at your schools. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean for drop-off and pickup? What does that mean for the potential for someone to drive a vehicle onto your campus and do harm? I mean, there's all kinds of issues that, again, right now are different than what they're going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. I mean, those of you who are doing capital improvements on your campuses, you've got to think about some of these things and how you're going to address them. And again, that goes back to that predict, plan, perform methodology. The predictive piece is so important. You know, you guys are all so good at your day jobs. You see an issue, you jump right to perform. And I can't stress enough that that is a mistake. If you see a vulnerability, take the time to sit down with one or two of your people and say, look, let's talk this through. What am I not seeing? Let's do our predictive work and understand, what does this look like today? Why didn't we see it or know about it? Is it a rate of change issue? Has something changed? Do we need to anticipate future change? And do we need to incorporate that into our planning process? Do we need to say, hey, you know what? We're okay for now. Let's look at this again. Let's put this on the calendar and look at it again 3 months from now. Let's look at it again a year from now. Whatever it is, because I can guarantee you the world around you is changing rapidly. And I guess that's the other thing. You got to look not only about what's changing on your campus, what's changing in your town, what's changing in your, in your state, in the area around you. A lot of these things are very significant. You know, I was talking with a group just recently about the change in temperature. Now, we had an interesting conversation because, of course, some of the people believed that it was global climate change. Some of the people believed that it was merely a cycle that we were going through. And my point was, what difference does it make? It really doesn't make a difference what your geopolitical position is on the warming of the world. It just matters that it is, in fact, a change and can affect you. And you'd be surprised how big that effect might be depending on, the different type of systems you have, the different things, how it affects you. Maybe it doesn't. But again, you need to look at it and cross it off the list. And that's, I would encourage all of you, again, in going through your process, doing your predictive work, sit down with your people and look at all of those things. So, with that said, I've used up all of our time today. Your plans are going to be tested in 2016, hopefully for none of you in a big way, but for sure in some way. I would love to see you test your plans in a peacetime environment. So if we can help you in any way with that, if you haven't had us look at your emergency response, crisis management, business continuity plans, if you haven't had us look at your behavioral risk and threat assessment program, your predictive intelligence program, please take advantage of that. Take advantage of us. We'll look at that stuff on a high level for you for no cost. Let us see what you've done and at least give you some direction on things you could be working at, that continuous improvement process. Let us work on that with you now, because in peacetime is the time we want to be doing that. So, again, I don't know, Bill, if we have any questions that have come up or that people have submitted during the call. I want to emphasize again to all of you, if you can be on the cyber exercise on December 14th, please do. go to our website, download the brief. We actually are we'll put up, we have a brief up, I believe, already from the first cyber exercise, but get involved now in the planning process for 2016, because it's going to be upon us very quickly, and again, things are changing every day. So Bill, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Harry. No questions. We appreciate your comments today. Always fun to hear your stories and experience with various schools. And we will look forward to talking to all of you next month. Happy New Year, happy holidays, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
happy holidays to everybody.